Director of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Advocate Robin Sewlal, Ms. Uveka Rangappa, Professor Peter Glendinning, Dr. Bhuvan Prakash Singh, Mr. Kiran Singh, Mr. CPM Chunu, distinguished guests, online viewers, namaskar and welcome to the 12th episode of Pustakalok, Light of a Book. It is a discussion on the book Reflections of a South African Media from 1994 to 2019 by author advocate Robin Sewlal. Indeed, today to commence our program, I would like to welcome our first guest speaker, and that is author advocate Robin Sewlal for his introductory remarks.
Thanks very much indeed, Susti, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on this publication. When we talk about reflections of the South African media, 1994 to 2019, it is quite a mouthful. But I must add, it has been quite an interesting journey trying to recap, have a look back, so to speak, on the first 25 years of our democracy in South Africa. And when I started thinking about this book in 2019, at the beginning of 2019, it was a very humble idea. And when I talk about a humble idea, I thought of getting anything between 10 and a dozen contributors to give me their thoughts on the media. But before I thought about that, I thought, why should I not write it? But then, you know, you don't want to sound as if you're an expert on every aspect of the media. And this is why I kind of reached out to people within the media industry, relied on people on their expertise and experience, and who knew their area, their beat in the media much more profoundly and closely than I would. And so I reached out to these dozen or so people, and then I realized, in a manner of speaking, which I'm eternally grateful for, nobody said no. And I then said to myself, you know, 25 years of democracy is quite a tall order. And if you focus it into the media, there's so many areas to cover. And then I started reaching out to other people. And as you would notice from the book itself, if you go to the index page, you would see the different beats that I covered in the book. And so people came, so to speak, to the party, which pleased me no end. And I relied a lot on people who I knew over the years, who had this experience and expertise. But what is very interesting about the book, and as you know, and I must share this, and many people ask me, and it's no secret, but 2021, as in this year, I've spent 3 decades at the Durban University of Technology. Previously, the Durban Institute of Technology, and then previously to that, the ML Sultan Technikon. And so I drew upon the people who've had a direct link with each of those organizations. In other words, they would have been either at Technikon Natal or ML Sultan Technikon, Durban Institute of Technology, or Durban University of Technology. And without taking anything from my colleagues on this panel, Uveka is an alumnus of Technikon Natal. Peter Glendinning was a visiting professor at the Durban University of Technology in 2018. Am I right, Peter? So yes, and so I drew upon all of these people. So if you take the likes of Anand Singh, my very good friend, who's the international editor for the New York Times, Joe Ritchie, Steve Ahern in Sydney, Australia, Fred Kumalo is an alumnus, Jeremy Maggs, Sibusiso Ngalwa, who's now with Newsroom Africa. So it was quite interesting that the people that I was reaching out to were people who had actually been at the university or the Technikon through the decades. And so I relied upon them and their kind of specialized knowledge in the different beats in journalism to put this book together. Putting the book together, I must say, was an interesting aspect of my life. We often think that we spend so many years, and as I said to you, three decades in academia and in the media industry prior to that. You think you know everything, but you learn so much from just reading through the scripts coming through and so to speak flooding my desk. I was taken aback at times where I thought I knew better about a certain aspect of the media industry, only to learn more reading through these scripts. And so that was very, very interesting. I met Madiba soon after he got out of prison. And, it sounds rhetorical. I suppose anybody and everybody in the world will say this, but you can't but not be fascinated by the aura of the individual. And that always stuck in my mind. And I didn't think that one day I'll be coming out with a publication and paying homage to him like I did in this publication. But, he impressed me so much, and I was absolutely taken aback by his memory. I met him on a couple of occasions, and the first time I introduced myself to him, he knew my name, he got to know me and a bit of my background in a very jovial, humorous way. I'll tell that story some other time. And the next time I met him, he spoke to me and says, "Hello, Robin, how are you doing?" And I was fascinated by them, and it stuck in my mind. And so when Madiba passed on in 2013, I realized I had to do something in tribute to the man. And so I hosted a 2-hour radio show on Radio Hinvani. And I took it upon myself to speak with people across the globe who had a relationship with me, with Mandela, or had kind of wrote about him in the columns, in the newspapers or in magazines. And so there were a vast array of people right across the globe, from New Zealand, Australia to the US. And interesting enough, the gentleman that wrote the foreword for this publication is Jeremy Thompson, the ex-senior news anchor at Sky News. And I had spoken to Jeremy during the course of the week because he was in South Africa to cover the funeral. And he knew Madiba when he was released from prison. Jeremy covered South Africa in the days of apartheid. And after Mandela's release, he was back in South Africa. And so I had spoken to Jeremy during the course of the week, and I said, "Jeremy, I've got this idea. It's a 2-hour show. Please join me. I know you're in the country." And Jeremy said to me, "Robin, what a pleasure." And just before I go on air, Jeremy says to me, "Robin, unfortunately, I can't join you because I'm also live on Sky News." And he says, "One day we'll have an opportunity to do something together." And so I remembered his words. And so when I approached Jeremy to write the foreword, I said to Jeremy, you've got about 2 or 3 weeks to write the foreword. And Jeremy gave me the foreword within 24 hours. And that's the kind of response I have from each of the contributors, needless to say, including people like Peter and Uveka. And that was very, very interesting, in terms of the support. So why the book? Apart from capturing the 25 years of our democracy from a media perspective, I thought in some shape or form to pay homage to the great Tata Madiba. And hence he is on the cover of the publication. That was my idea. I had spoken with the Nelson Mandela Foundation from day one and said that if you could give me a picture with media surrounding Madiba, that'll be great. And they said to me, "Robin, we'll look around." I got a few pics from various sources, and I just thought that I should do more justice to Madiba on the cover of this publication. And that's when I commissioned my very good friend Ashley Munsami from Durban, and his response for the wonderful image on the book. And sorry, should I say on the cover of the book. And I took it upon myself also to release the book on Madiba Day. That's the 18th of July. And so that's where, what is also very, very ironic is that when I spoke with the contributors, I never mentioned Madiba's name at all, whether in my telephonic conversation with them or in my written communique with them. But it's quite interesting that a fair number of the contributors includes Madiba in their chapters. Very, very interesting. And so it's always nice to have that kind of independent kind of input. And when you do get the input, it starts to gel. And I think that's very important. The second reason why I got this book out is for the benefit of society at large. And I felt when I thought about this book that we must reach out to society as a whole. And when I talk about society, I'm not necessarily talking about the media society. I'm talking about ordinary people who are in different jobs, in different careers, who need to know more about the media. Because when we have a media which is understood by society, society benefits from that knowledge. And again, society is not just the South African society. I look at society across the globe, and I think that's very, very important. And that's why you would notice that the book is made available at no cost, because it's important that we reach out and we do the best we can do for everybody. That's in a nutshell my story about the book. I can talk to you more about the book, but I suppose, Peter and my good friend Uveka will add more from their perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Advocate Robin Sewlal, for those introductory remarks on the book. Our next guest speaker is Ms. Uveka Rangappa. She is an ENCA reporter in South Africa. Uveka G is a renowned South African journalist, news anchor, TV presenter, and philanthropist. She is currently a senior news anchor at the ENCA. She began her broadcasting career in 1996 with the SABC at Lotus FM. After 5 years, she then moved to East Coast Radio before leaving Durban entirely to pursue greener pastures in Johannesburg. With nearly 6 years' experience under her belt, in 2002, she joined Prime Media Broadcasting, where she worked at 702 and 94.7. This afternoon, we welcome on this episode of Pustakalok Ms. Uveka Rangappa for her remarks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. And I'm really, really honored, firstly, to have been part of Robin's great work and then to be asked to be part of this discussion as well. So thank you very much for including me. I feel very loved and wanted, and and like this makes this job actually worth it when people feel I have something to contribute. Look, it's been 25 years since I started this journey into journalism. And when Robin actually contacted me and said, would you, be a contributor to this. And like he said, he didn't tell any of us who the others were going to be. So when I finally saw the end product, and I saw so many of my friends, so many people who I have crossed paths with in 25 years, I was pleasantly surprised. And I said, I want to know their stories. I mean, what did they have to say? I knew them in studio, I knew them at work, but I didn't quite, know what this job actually meant to many of them. And some of them started with me. They came as students. I had been established, someone like Sama Patel, who came through, and she was this crazy young girl. And then before that, I had met someone like Kenny Maestri when I did a 3-month stint at Capital Radio, and I didn't know, you were sort of starstruck at the time. I didn't know our paths would cross later. So there were so many people who are now, as I sit here today and I look back and I've read their stories, it really, really, really has just opened my world up even more, if you can believe it, despite being in this industry for 25 years. So Robin, thank you so much, not only for allowing me to share my story, but giving me more insight into the people that I might have taken for granted and the people who I didn't know so much about, or what these jobs actually mean for them and what they mean for journalism and radio in particular, which is my first love. So I've had to make some notes because at my very ripe old age, I kind of forget a lot of things. So I'm going to start with Jeremy Thompson, and having watched him on Sky News for so many years and used bits from there. I mean, we all sort of, watch each other and kind of the thing is, the world seems so big, but when you are in this industry and you hear these stories, you just realize it might not be as big as we think. We are also interconnected in some way. And Robin, like you said, he found some way to work with you at some point in the future as well. So Jeremy Thompson, just describing in his foreword, Nelson Mandela's rainbow speech, like he said, at the Union Buildings on the 10th of May, 1994. I mean, he describes how he really felt his purpose as a journalist at that point. And, it might have been a moment of reckoning for him is how I interpreted it, sort of describing like, this is what it's all about. It was the biggest story in the world at the time. And you were there. And I thought about, where was I at that time? 1994, fresh out of high school, out of matric in 1993. And then, of course, this was my first year of studying at the then Technikon Natal. And I wonder if I had actually realized the impact of what was happening at the Union Buildings on the 10th of May, 1994. I mean, I probably didn't. Looking back now, I didn't realize just what the magnanimity of that was, of that moment, what it would have been for somebody like Jeremy Thompson, and what it would be for me so many years later, in December 2013, when I was at the Union Buildings, when I was looking at Madiba's body lying in state. And I thought, wow, here's somebody describing that moment of freedom, not just for a man, but for an entire country. And that I was there for one of our saddest, darkest periods, when this great man had passed on, being there for days at the Union Buildings, watching people walk past his casket, and myself doing that at some point, talking to world leaders like Jesse Jackson, talking to other, African presidents who had come through to pay their respects. And I just thought, wow, just look at that. Somebody's account of 1994 to mine in 2013, when I stood there covering this and trying not to cry. And it brought back all those emotions, Robin, having to, to think about that and read Jeremy's and then link my own experience all those years later. I did miss my matric reunion in 2013, but it was also worth it to just be a part of that history. But of course, none of us would have ever wished that Madiba would have left us. I mean, we wish that he would be here now to sort out the mess that we're in, wouldn't we? So as I read on, I saw the stories of all of those people that I had crossed paths with, and people who were part of my journey. I mean, anybody who knows Ashok Ramsarup knows he's a force to be reckoned with. I mean, he was one of the first people I met when I got to the SABC, when I was given that chance to complete my internship there. And then, of course, they employed me full time. And we would get into studio at I think it was 3:30 in the morning. And I don't think Ash had ever left from the day before. I think he slept there. We often asked him, did you sleep here? I mean, here was a man, you walk in, he's got splicing tape around his neck. The studio looked like a bomb had hit it, but he was busy. And in my piece, where I talk about somebody who could dial Lesotho at a time of civil unrest or whatever was going on there at the time, and dial a payphone and get a random person who would pick up the phone and describe for us what they were seeing, that was somebody like Ashok Ramsarup. I mean, he would tire us out. He would make us feel like, gee, can you just retire now? But when I look back on the lessons that somebody like Ash actually taught me, I thought they just don't make them the way they did in the days of Ashok Ramsarup. I think they broke the mold after they made him, and I have so much to actually to be grateful for to that man. So I was pleasantly surprised, Robin, to see that he was part of this. And if anybody can teach anyone about radio, I think Ashok Ramsarup should be right there up on that pedestal as well. Then, of course, Salma Patel, like I say, who is now this big shot at the SABC as well, came to us as a kid, came to us as a student, and I see how she has grown, and her enthusiasm and her passion for radio and the love that her listeners have for her. I mean, it shows on social media, and we have our little chats, WhatsApp, we WhatsApp each other every now and then. And it's wonderful to see that how people have grown in the sphere, how they've grown in the genre, but they've managed to stay the same in many ways. And the good things have stayed the same as well for them. Also, Alex Mtiane, who I remember as well, and I met as a young man, and I see that he's gone on to actually do wonderful things. And then the lovely Zai Khan. I mean, I think we had a lunch about 2 or 3 years ago as well. Another person with that infectious energy. And I see she's managed to keep that going, and an energy and her bubbliness, if I were to put it that way, that could actually just fill a room. And then, of course, there's the other Jeremy, the Jeremy Maggs, who at one stage, or up until very recently, was my colleague and my boss even at some point, and my co-anchor as well. And, he speaks about the constant battle of television to survive in a time of radio as well, and very difficult times that media has been going through as well, as many of you would know, when it comes to politics, when it comes to the hard times that the country is facing, when it comes to us putting our politicians and those accountable, holding them to account. How often over the past couple of years have we heard, well, the media is making it seem like this, the media is making it seem like that. We've often been the scapegoat for just very bad workmanship, if I could put it that way, in this country. So Jeremy making all the valid points about just how difficult it is to be on television, and to meet those expectations of what your viewer wants. And of course, it always is a choice between radio and television, or always competing with radio, the immediacy of radio, and television having its limitations as well in covering these stories. So it took me back also to my first love, and I must say radio will always be my first love. It really, really will always be my first love. And I suppose I should tell you here as well, I will be going back there, Robin, because and back to community radio, because I've kind of hung up my boots on television as of last Friday. So I'm very excited also that I can say this to you here in this forum, that I will be going back to radio, doing some work with radio, and also, which is where I think David Hodgkiss, if I'm saying his name properly, his bit on community radio and the importance of community radio. I said, wow, this thing that Robin has done has really come at the right time when I read this, and it helped me make that decision about going back to my radio roots. So I must thank you in that way, Robin. You sort of, in making me write about it and reading what other people have actually had to say about radio and their experiences as well. And David's piece in particular, the importance of community radio, really, really spoke to my heart and made a very difficult decision very, very easy in the past couple of weeks as well. Of course, Kenny Maestri, who I call Cousin Kenny, because we developed that kind of relationship when we both worked at Prime Media. I was at 702, then I was at 94.7, and then he was at 94.7, and now he's back at 702, and still one of my very, very favorite people to actually listen to. And I even sent him a message a couple of weeks ago. I said, Cousin Kenny, you're playing all this lovely music, and it's taking me back to my clubbing days and my youth, and and we got to chat on WhatsApp, and it's so wonderful just to see that, many people just see people like Kenny maybe as DJs and people who play music, but they come with such a rich history. And also him taking me back to my Capital Radio days when I was just this young kid wondering, where am I going to fit into this big world of journalism? I don't even know how I fell into this. I was wanting to be a clinical psychologist. God knows how I ended up filling in this form for journalism and finding myself there in that registration hall at Technicon Natal. So people like Cousin Kenny take you back and say, well, that's where you fit in. That's where you started. And now you found your place. And now you've got to give back as well, which is what my work going back to community radio is gonna allow me to do, is to actually give back. And then Ranesh Doraj, who I remember as this kind, gentle guy who used to be on Lotus FM, and now I see that he's doing all this important work and talking about the importance of elections as well, and having covered so many of them, and you just think, oh, we've got another election coming up. It's going to be such long days and long hours. And it took me back to why all of this has actually been worth it, is telling the real stories, not just saying, okay, the ANC's got like another 500,000 votes or whatever the story is. It was talking about our responsibility to actually bring people, to bring the voters, the actual stories that they needed to know to make the right choices. And again, not to have them listen to the paid for propaganda that many of them might have actually been, that has been forced upon them, whether it's been in radio campaigning or TV campaigning, or we all know, just what politics can come across and what the real story actually is. So for me, and I thought, how am I actually going to do an election? I don't feel clever enough to cover an election with Dan Moyane at my side, who was my partner on air for the longest time. It's actually his birthday today as well. So I thought, how am I going to do this? How am I going to sound clever or sound like I actually belong on the stage? And then when you realize, you actually just start to speak simply, and you tell those real stories. That is what people actually enjoy. When you look at your Twitter feed and then they say to you, thanks for telling us this, or this has been so wonderful too. Thanks for bringing us that little side story at the election center. That is what South Africans, voters actually want to know. And you think, okay, this is the job I was made for, because I spoke from here. I spoke from my heart. And that is what actually touched people. That is what resonated with them. And then you think, okay, that is why the universe chose me, or I chose this job. Because I tell you, it's not for sissies. Robin will tell you, journalism is not for sissies as well. I mean, you have to grow a really, really thick skin also, because with the compliments come the criticism as well. So, you know, all of these stories, and just looking at just how many people have interpreted their role when it comes to our sort of radio and media in this democratic phase that we're going through, I think has really, really opened our eyes, even when you've been doing it for so many years, to say, yes, that is what it's all about. No story is a stupid story. No story is too simple. Sometimes we've got to take it back to basics. And I think, Robin, sometimes when I listen to some people on television, and I watch them, and I listen to people on radio, and I thought, but you've missed the basic rule of like radio 101 or journalism 101. You haven't told me, you know, the who, the what, the where, the when, or the why, or even if you did, you didn't make it clear enough. And I think something like this, Robin, what you've done and what you've actually put together is something that I think many people who think they are journalists, many people who think they are broadcasters these days actually need to read. And those who are studying it, those who are coming out of our institutions at the moment, need to go back to simple basics. Because as one of my editors once said to me, she said to me, the story you're telling me has got to answer a question: how does it actually affect the price of bread? And I think many of us forget that, because many journalists these days want to be the story. Many of them are asked to become the story. I even had one CEO say, you know, I want to see you at the BCCSA. Every week we must be at the BCCSA because you've got to be that controversial, because we've got to get the view and numbers up. And I thought, I don't really think that that's what it's all about. I really think it's about telling people what they need to know, telling my parents, the 70 somethings, what they need to know to make proper life decisions and get from day to day. And I think slowly, Robin, that is slipping away from us. It's slipping away from those who are coming out of journalism school wanting to be the stars, wanting to be the story, and forgetting completely to actually tell the story. And we've got to save our country also, I think, from a lot of the political manipulation that is out there. And I'm sad to say that it is creeping very slowly into many, many newsrooms, more than we are actually aware of. So this publication couldn't have come at a better time, especially for me, as I'm about to begin a new chapter in my career, which involves giving back as well to the wonderful medium that is radio.
Oh, thank you so much, Uveka ji, for those memoirs and taking us through your journey as well. Indeed, so profound. Our next guest speaker, joining us live from Michigan, USA, is Professor Peter Glendinning. And Professor Glendinning has earned the MFA in Experimental Studios at Syracuse University in 1978. With previous education included a BA in photojournalism and a BA in political science, a BFA in studio art, and 2 years of study in the School of Law at the Syracuse University. And he studied with the Lizette model at the New School for Social Research in 1973. So today we welcome on this episode of Pustakalok, Professor Peter Glendinning.
First of all, thank you all very much for sharing this time. I apologize for my computer issues at the beginning. I'm glad that we have breaking news about, is it Uveka? Breaking news broken right here in this on moving from one path of the career to another. Congratulations. That's wonderful. I join with her and with other colleagues here in applauding Advocate Sewlal, my good friend Robin, for putting out a tome at a time that is so critical when we have journalists, the number of journalists who are murdered every year rising, when we have media that is a new form, banning Sky News Australia from YouTube. Quite a shocking development to anyone who's interested in freedom of expression, to see that these Facebooks and YouTubes and Instagrams and so forth are squashing the voices of true journalism. I think we're at a very perilous time, and I think the lessons that are in Robin's book from so many different perspectives, from people who worked in the media and around the media through the amazing journey that has been South Africa since 1994. I think there are so many lessons there to be learned by the young journalists who are the vanguard that must defend this freedom of expression. And as was put so eloquently by, is it Uveka? I don't want to mispronounce your name. And her being in the vanguard and over this past period of time, seeing these different developments from her particular perch, I learned so much from that. And I hope that the young people coming forward will recognize that they are part of a tradition which is so vital to any democracy, and that is the untrammeled and unhampered sharing of information by which the voters can make the decisions. Because after all, they are the people that the media is directed to serve. And I think Robin has done a tremendous service not only to the country of South Africa, but to the world in bringing this set of reflections together. So I want to thank him for that. I'm certainly going to be assigning certain readings to my students as we begin our fall semester here at Michigan State University. My original bachelor's degree was in journalism at the Newhouse School at Syracuse University. And I actually did freelance journalism for a year after I graduated. I was on the student newspaper for 3 years, going out and from 1969 to 73, photographing and writing about many of the events of the United States in that very tumultuous period of protests and Vietnam War and so forth. And respect tremendously, even though I'm in the art department now, still consider what I'm doing to be based in that original education. And the project that I did in South Africa as a Fulbright scholar, frankly, could not have been accomplished without the generous and truly professional and welcoming invitation and constant action that I received as a benefit of the kindness of the folks at Durban University of Technology. Robin and Aisha and Destiny Subin and the wonderful students at that institution really contributed tremendously to the project that I did. You may not be aware of it, but it's entitled Attached to the Soil. And the project is based on Madiba's opening words, the very first words that he shared when he was standing up on the podium, having put his hand down, and now the president. And can you imagine what he had to, this struggle? What on earth do I say, right? What do I say to my, not only the people of South Africa, but to the world when I have put my hand down and I'm president? How many millions of people are hanging on those words? And it was so striking, as Uveka said, to read Jeremy Thompson's foreword and to think about the journalists who were there and the role that they had in reporting and sharing that story. Just a phenomenal, life-changing opportunity, I'm sure, for them, a life-changing moment for them, and really a life-changing moment for the world. So what did Madiba say? Some people were afraid that he would say, all right, we've won, let's go out and kill everybody that didn't agree with us. And those were extremists on one side, and then there were extremists on others. And he hewed a path in the middle that was so generous and caring. And I'll read it to you. His very first words, his first words were, "To my compatriots." So right from the beginning, he included everybody. Everybody was a compatriot. And he said, "I have no hesitation in saying each one of us is as intimately attached to the soil of this beautiful country as are the famous jacaranda trees of Pretoria and the mimosa trees of the Bushveld. Each time one of us touches the soil of this land, we feel a sense of personal renewal. So he created a beautiful metaphor. You may be a jacaranda, I may be a mimosa, that person over there might be a fever tree, and there's a stinkwood tree and an oak tree, but we've all got our roots in the same soil. And the young people of today, journalists especially, are rooted themselves in a South Africa that is formed not only by Madiba's metaphor, but also by the metaphors of others who have power and had power. And their views about South Africa have formed the world that the young people live in today. And when I came to South Africa as a Fulbright scholar in 2019 and spent 7 months there, I interacted with, I lectured at 16 universities, over 1,000 students. 48 of them stepped forward, many from DUT, to say, I have a metaphor. And that was my challenge to them. What is your metaphor? Because 25 years from now, young people are going to be looking back at you as the old people and saying, how did that person's metaphor affect the world that I'm living in 2056 or whatever, right? So these young people stepped forward and they created their own personal metaphor, and they found a person whose some aspect of their life story related to that metaphor. I had the great privilege of working with Blessing Zaba from DUT, wonderful student, whose metaphor read, they may think they may bury you, but they don't know that's a favor because you're a seed. And the subject for that metaphor, it was a great privilege to work with Madam Ila Gandhi, who's also a contributor to the book, and who spent a number of years under house arrest and banishment. And we photographed her at the Phoenix settlement and interviewed her there and did her oral history there, and made a wonderful combination of Blessing's metaphor, her oral history story, and the portrait that we made to create a document that crosses the boundaries of art and journalism and documentary. And that's where I think Robin's book is so special, because the the amazing panoply of authors covers the full spectrum. And I think we see today, and Uveka, you're absolutely right, I'm in my perspective as well, that there is a temptation to be the star. But what's also a good temptation is to recognize that the story can now be multimedia. And in community radio, obviously, it's not just sound. From one voice, it's many sounds that are now blended together, and with digital technologies, and this is addressed in the book as well, the ability that we have to create stories in a new way. And I think any student reading this book can see from that panoply the various options that were then and that there are now. And I think it's tremendously exciting. And just looking over the list of people, I picked out just a few that I think really represent the range that the book presents. Not only Madam Gandhi, who has done so much herself personally to promote journalism as a career, and especially among disadvantaged youth. Her work has been remarkable. But you also have Zadumo Mafumulo. I'm sorry, Mafumolo. I don't, maybe I didn't pronounce her name right. I apologize. But she was, she's a person who broke through glass ceilings and still is as a very young person. And taking women's roles in sports journalism and sports broadcast, which has traditionally been a very male-dominated arena, and leading the way for others like her. And I think it's very significant to have her story as part of the book, I also looked at with great interest at, is it Fakir Hassan? Yeah. And the idea of consumer rights, which is so contemporary and which was not so much a part of South Africa or other parts of the world in the very recent past, and to have young journalists recognize today that that they can be leaders in change simply by doing the job of reporting. Not that they're political as journalists, not that they're advocates as journalists in a sense of political persuasion, but in identifying issues that are critical. So I think that the timeliness of this book, when mainstream journalism is really being broken apart before our eyes into so many different pieces because of the impact of the social media. And it's a period of great change when really I don't think anybody knows what the outcome is going to be. Having a book like this that reflects on the development of media through a very tumultuous but very joyful and interesting period in South Africa, which of course reflects the world around it, I think is a tremendously valuable contribution. And I consider it a great honor to be a part of it and to be associated with others. And look forward to meeting them all in person. I'm coming back in 2022. The exhibit of the works, 50 works that were produced, are going to be at the DUT Gallery, along with 5 others from August through the beginning of September. And so I'll look forward to interacting and finding opportunities to see, hopefully, all of you in person. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you so much, Professor Peter Glendinning. We definitely enjoyed your story, and thank you for sharing that. And we do look forward in welcoming you next year. Advocate Robin Sewlal, back to you.
Well, once again, thank you, Uveka. Thank you, Peter. You know, when Uveka was speaking so eloquently about the early days, and Uveka may know that I was at Capital Radio as well. So there's some kind of association there. But also you make a very interesting point, and if I may say this, and I say this very humbly, that very few people knew about the book. And as Uveka pointed out, even the contributors didn't know who the other contributors were. And for me, if I may use that as an example, it's about staying in the background and ensuring people who could actually write about the different aspects of the media get the limelight, so to speak. And I think that's very, very important from a journalism point of view as well. Uveka's point is very, very important. We get journalists these days who want to be celebrities, they want to be the superstars, you know, they want to hop on a plane, you know, they want to be answering their own questions when they ask newsmakers at times. And so that's an important point to keep in mind as well. And I'm hoping that this book will kind of, as Uveka did say and Peter did say, hopefully the leaders of tomorrow will be reading this book and using it to the best of their ability, and obviously empowering themselves as to how the media actually operates. We've got a long way to go. We thought we were there not very long ago, but I think we've gone a bit backwards. But I think we can pick that button up again, and we need to actually get our industry working as smoothly as we possibly can. So thank you again, Uveka. Thank you, Peter. I'm really looking forward to your exhibition in 2022.
Advocate Robin Sewlal. Our next guest speaker is Dr. Bhuvan Prakash Singh. Dr. Singh was the Deputy Director of the Head of Communications for the KZN Department of Sport and Recreation from 2005 to 2015. And his doctorate topic was based on strategic communication policy and strategy. He is also an educator and author based in Durban, South Africa. Namaste and welcome, Dr. Bhuvan Prakash Singh, for your remarks on this episode of Pustakalok.
Namaskar to my fellow panelists, and especially our online viewers. The erstwhile panelists, of course, being Advocate Robin Sewlal, the author, editor, and compiler of this excellent piece, Ms. Uveka Rangappa, ENCA, ex-Verulam, and the saving grace being I knew her father personally as I served as a teacher under him as a principal. Prof. Peter Glendinning of Glendinning of the USA. What a pleasure listening to you, sir, and for your participation here in South Africa. My good friends, Ms. Shisti Harinarayan, Ms. P.M. Kuno, and of course, Dr. Yogi Ji of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center. It's a pleasure being with you once again. I must say that I'm safeguarded in my comments in the sense that I'm not one of the media personalities that I'm sharing on this panel, but my closest claim to media fame was losing the post of station manager to Shanil Singh at Lotus FM. So it's almost there with you, but I just wasn't eventually. But I do have good friends within the media, coming from a communication background. Mr. Omar Isak, the ex-Prime Media CEO, Kagisa Media CEO, Mr. Khalik Sharif, E-Media CEO. We taught together at Forest Haven Secondary. So I'm very much in tune in terms of the thinking in media and, of course, the interesting aspect that your industry actually is. I want to say that in terms of the piece that we are discussing here, it's of such great credibility that the three people on this panel, it's Robin, Uveka, and Peter, are leading industry media experts in the industry. And that lends a lot of credibility to the piece itself. Together, of course, with the 40 contributors to this piece, Robin. And in terms of any piece of this nature, which can be construed academia in its proper sense, together with that being in public interest, the contributors and the presenters of the content are of critical importance. And of course, your stature stands out for itself. The interesting thing that went through my mind as I was reading the piece on the various pieces yesterday was that coming from communication in government, I have the interesting job, or had the interesting job, of trying to advise my seniors, especially the MECs, in terms of what makes the media. And of course, you know, sometimes, as you were saying, of presenters where they think that I am the media, sometimes our seniors believe that they make the news, and they make the media. And from a strategy point of view, you've got to advise them that you don't make the media. It's by association that you make the media. But interestingly, I've just been engaged in the strategy aspect and the policy aspect of the media and communication. With regard to the story itself, you know, of the 40 people that spoke, each one had a particular niche to speak on, and I think Robin's covered that quite adequately. I'd just like to mention a few. For example, people that determine how the media actually influences our everyday thinking. For instance, when I speak about everyday thinking, I'm talking about what we think, how we think, the great influence that the media presents on us, which includes, for example, the wider birth of advertising, for example, the products we use, what is publicly, you know, acceptable in terms of your opinion and your thinking and your principles, etc. In every sphere and facet of our lives, the media is present, whether we acknowledge it or not, and there's no escape. In your article here, Desmond Desar states that the media has a critical role to inform the public opinion and to shape its views. And of course, all of you have spoken about that, because the society is a product of the media. And I think this actually undermines and underlines more than just the news that you cover, is the manner in which you present the particular news that you cover, or any aspect of the media. And I think Uveka spoke about the authenticity that needs to come through when a person reports. And for me, this is quite interesting, especially when you look at the recent civil unrest, for example. We know that, for example, in the media, your viewership matters. And we know that what catches the eye is, of course, the negativity. And of course, reporting itself is supposed to be, in my opinion, of course, the presenter presenting the facts for me as a viewer to make up my mind. Of course, there's a great deal of influencing by the media presenter, but I think that interpretation, again, is not intended to undermine the listener, the viewer. But sometimes, for example, if I like a presenter, I'm very influenced by the presenter's perception of the content being presented. And sometimes it's dangerous in the sense that we allow our personal opinions to be colored by others. And that again brings the tables back to the media personalities. The responsibility you carry is phenomenal in terms of guiding your viewer or your listener as opposed to directing them on exactly how to think and how to behave. Ila Gandhi, that Peter mentioned as well, her belief that the essence of good journalism is the media focused on social change. And I think ultimately that is what the function of media is. While you present the context, it is supposed to be developmental. And the intention is to improve the lot of society. And this is sometimes escaped the actual presentation by some of our journalists out there. Pakita said as well, that was mentioned, who spoke on the issue of the consumer views. We as people sometimes don't know our own rights. And so fundamentally, the media is intended to educate and to inform, and through informing to influence as well. Many of you spoke about the qualities of a good journalist, and we've actually covered that aspect as well. Because ultimately, you as journalists in various forms, whether print or radio or television, you are people. And people are biased, people have their own opinions. And I think the walking the tightrope comes through in the sense of how much of your bias actually comes through in the presentation of your content. And I don't think that's an easy line on which to follow. I like what Mr. Jeremy Thompson said in his foreword, and if I may just quote that. Besides the crux of what constitutes a journalist, he says, and I quote, "A moment of history in which I was an eyewitness," and of course here talks of Madiba, "it confirmed my deep belief that it is a privilege to be a journalist, to be offered a front row seat on history, to be given the honor and duty to convey events with candor and integrity, with fairness and impartiality, to the many millions who could not be here." So to you guys out there in the space, the media space, journalism is much more than just a job. It's a way of life. And of course, I think Uveka mentioned Salma Patel, who transfers from radio to journalism. She very simply and succinctly indicated that, and I quote, "The listener enjoys an anchor who listens and then responds, not one who loves listening to his or her own voice." And again, this is very important because I think as in any job that one has to do, you have a particular agenda and a particular mandate. But sometimes as an anchor, it's important to engage the person you're speaking to so that you can actually carry that mandate across. And I think the art of listening is sometimes equally as important, if not more important, than the art of presenting, for you to be in tune with the audience that you have. Of course, Robin, your book also covers the role of the SABC as the initial guardian and custodian of media broadcasting in South Africa from 1936. And recently, as Peter mentioned, the emergence of the electronic media has come to the fore and is providing the alternatives to mainstream media. I think Steve Earn's article on the formation of the National Electronic Media Institute of South Africa, or the MISA as you know it, has created a space for the digital media and the internet. This, of course, has opened the great space of social media. And I think in terms of presentation and being incisive as a media platform, the adoption of multiple media platforms seems to be the order of the day, where every radio station and television station, for example, has a social media platform as well. In terms of legislation, yes, Robin, your book covers both personal presentations of experiences as well as historical facts about the industry. And I think with the advent of 1994 and democracy, the legislation that has been constituted within the media industry actually opens the arms of the industry to much more individualism and far less government involvement. However, I think the reader would be mindful of what Uveka indicated, that good or otherwise, sometimes outside influences come in to determine the content that's on radio. And I think history has shown us that the media is the great influencer. people like Hitler have won wars based on the media and the messages that they put out there. So it's a very powerful tool. And I think the objectivity with which you guys have to manage your industry is tested very, very often. And sometimes the influence and the interference cannot be seen as well. And here, on a more humorous note, last night I was watching Power to Truth by Dr. J.J. Tabane. I like his style. It's definitely not, if I may say, not the usual professionalism that comes through, but he's an engaging character. And interestingly, he interviewed Robert Marawa, who has just not had his contract renewed at the SABC. And whilst listening to that, I was thinking about this particular book, Robin, because it spoke of labor issues within the industry. There was a lot of discussion and alluding to interference from the outside as well, which is something that you've covered just now. And I think the power of the media actually determines the amount of attention it gets as a power tool. Why people in influence to people like us that actually are the followers. The people like Alex Mchiane and Ashok Ramsarup, who spoke about the print media, the imports of television. You mentioned Anand Singh that's there. There are multiple platforms of media that are covered in your book, a whole range from the legal journalism to sports journalism, etc. And of course, I think of importance was the international conference you had on radiocracy in 2001, which I think actually opened the way for community radio and community stations in South Africa. And I believe this also covers community television. And I think that brought in a new era in the media in South Africa. And of course, Uveka, you're going back to community radio. But again, it's become a very powerful tool because coming from a background in government, so to speak, and in communication, media is used to reach the individual, no matter at what level of the tier of society you stand in. And I think community media is used to take away this power from the so-called realm of the elite, the one that could afford to buy the paper and afford to buy the television. Now with community newspapers, with community radio, etc., every member of society can be accessed. And looking at the government mandate, for example, where you have to serve the public, alternative forms of media are very, very important and powerful. And I think here you guys in mainstream media have this challenge in the sense that you have a particular audience. It's 57 million in this country, but each one of you needs a piece of that audience in terms of a mandate. And that brings in the competitive nature of your industry as well. And I think community media is basically gaining more and more ground as we go on, because radio is now open, the print media is open, and of course, television itself. With regard to community radio, I'd just like to read what Bill Simmering's view is. He says, community radio in South Africa began with a strong sense of purpose to be an essential player in creating a new democracy. And Mashiro Boloka states that community television was ushered in by the white paper broadcast in 1998, which makes it legislated. However, he doubts the sustainability of the current governance model. And in talking about that, I think of the Greater Durban television that Mikhail Pepper speaks about. While you have community media that is free, I think it is funded basically by goodwill, by mandates of government, by grants, and mainly by advertising. But the sustainability of the model, with the 25 years have gone through, is bringing that aspect of community media into question. How sustainable is that particular governance approach? And I think here it would indicate that mainstream media would therefore always have the edge, while community media is trying to break its way through. The intention is good, but the sustainability is a great factor. And I think, Robin, the piece that you put together is something for even legislators to look at in terms of the feedback they've got. Of course, your book also spoke about alternate forms of publishing and other forms of media. If I may just mention them, I like when Kulikani Magubane cites Chinua Achebe, and he says, until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And yes, of course, it is the one who tells the story that decides on the narrative. And I think it is here that the mandate of the honesty and sincere integrity of the media actually comes to the fore in terms of its play. I do have a little experience in terms of alternate media, in the sense that I authored a book called When the Chalk is Down. And Peter, what I need to mention here is that I'll be very glad to, visit your exhibition, because strangely enough, and this is something to share with you, while I had authored this book, the eThekwini municipality, who had adopted this book as one of its, accolades in the One City, One Book project, actually engaged eThekwini College to express the reading of the book through visual media. And there was an art exhibition at the Durban City Hall in 2017, where students read the book, but presented it through visual media. And I think that actually underscores exactly what Robin has been trying to indicate in this book, that there's various forms and platforms of media. And people can relate to it in what they look at best and what they relate to personally. And of course, Peter, I must read your little aspect where your photographs and the portraits of South Africa, and you're from the USA, although you spent some time here. It is heartening for you to see value in South Africa and to tell your story through alternate media. And I think that that is something that many of us will be looking forward to. Coming back to the boring aspect of the book as literature, and as Shristi indicated, sometimes a genuine comment on the language and the imagery, I need to say that the telling of the story of the reflections of the South African media through personalities, you are, as media people, you have a following, you have people that relate to you, people that know your face, they know your voice, and that are your ardent supporters. And so you're people of great influence. And I think telling the story through people like that, Robin, actually carries the story of the media and the importance of the media and the opportunities of the media to the much greater audience. There are little aspects of the accounts here. I think through the personal accounts as well, the honesty comes through. And people relate to honesty. And sometimes in some of the stories, the fallibility of the person comes through. And people relate to fallibility. It makes you human like us. Sometimes you're just a voice on the radio or you're a face on television. We don't know you as a person. But in reading these accounts here, we get to know what makes you think, and where your importance lies. And that's actually a great technique for the book itself. The language is simple in the sense that a student would be able to read it and understand it. It is engaging. And I think as a piece of literature, it augurs well for the history of this book. And of course, Robin, you mentioned that this book is available free. That's a great accolade to you. And more importantly, to your objective in releasing this piece. I think the greater good will definitely be released. The cover picture you mentioned of Madiba, I think you guys in the media considered Madiba as the darling of the media. I think whether it was in radio, whether in art form, whether through print media, he enjoyed. And your attention, because you epitomize what it is to be the new South Africa. In conclusion, I'd like to say that people like Uveka, who hails from Vedlum, by the way, where I live, people like Yogus Naya, who came from Tongat, and of course, Peter mentioned Zunduma Mapumulu or Mbumbulu, are simple people that come from so-called small little towns. But the media industry now caters for expertise. And as people that work hard gain the benefits of expressing themselves. So you people out there, you don't just represent yourselves and your families, you represent our towns, our aspirations, our hopes, and our dreams. And on that note, I just want to wish the author, the editors, and all the contributors all the very best for this particular publication. All the best to you. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhuvan Prakash Singh, for that insight. With this, we've come to the conclusion of episode 12 of Pustakalok. I'd like to invite Mr. Sipiwe Mchunu from the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban to render this evening's vote of thanks.
Namaskar, greetings to all of you. On behalf of Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, I am honored today to deliver a vote of thanks on today's program, Pustakalok, meaning Light of the Book. This was the 12th episode of this program. Today's book's discussion was about the book called Reflections of the South African Media from the period 1994 to 2019, authored by Advocate Robin Sewlal. Thank you very much, sir, for this wonderful book. Allow me now to thank our online guest, the author himself, Advocate Robin Sewlal, for his great remarks about this wonderful book. And secondly, allow me to thank Uveka Rangappa, ENCA reporter from South Africa, for her great remarks also regarding this prestigious book. Thirdly, allow me to thank Professor Peter Glendinning from Michigan State University in USA for his also stellar remarks regarding this wonderful book. Lastly, allow me to thank our Dr. Uveka Singh, author and educator from South Africa, for his great remarks. To Robin G, Uveka G, Glendinning G, and Bhuvan G, thank you for taking part on today's program. To Director of Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center, Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Roki, Sristi Harinarayan, Kiran Singh, thank you very much. Thank you for taking part on today's program. To all our online viewers, we'd like to say thank you for taking part on today's program. You are kindly advised to visit ICCR Durban Force Facebook page for all cultural activities regarding the cultural items organized by Swami Vivekananda in Durban. To all of you, have a wonderful evening. Namaskar.